All right, back with episode 31 of the HYPEWORKS podcast with myself, Alex, Jake,
Me. Hello.
and welcome Daniel. And I often try to pronounce people's names, so Daniel Camilo. Is that
You can
correct?
pronounce. I'm French. I speak French and Portuguese, so you can say it in
This is
English,
what happened.
Daniel. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay,
But
okay.
yeah, Daniel.
Camilo,
Daniel
okay.
is fine. Yeah. Camilo. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and Daniel, like I've kind of been interacting with you on Twitter/X for like a long time. We all lived in Shenzhen, where you are, China.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like I've
Yeah.
known you for like a long time, but we've never really kind of talked at length, other than exchanging short kind of tweets. So good
Mm-hmm.
to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very
Um,
happy. And like you say, that happens a lot. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
yeah. So yeah, what's happening in China? Because myself and Jake, we left China a long time ago. Well, now like a few years ago now. What's the latest there in China to keep us up to date?
I mean that's a big question. Where to start? I don't know. I think it's still the same. I mean, things keep going. It's not as it used to be like 10 years ago, where everything was happening super fast and everything was like booming and whatever. I think now, in general, life is more matured. I guess things kind of slow down. I don't know, but that's a very broad question. If you ask me like in some specific field, I mean, for me, China is still cool. I mean, of course, it has its issues. It has its tremendous issues, but it's from an individual perspective, it can still be a very comfortable place, I think, to be, and with a lot of
Okay.
opportunities. Yeah.
Daniel, a few questions because our audience don't know this, but how long have you lived in
Mhm.
China and what initially took you there?
Sure. I've been in Shenzhen specifically for 12 years, since 2012. Although I did live in Tianjin for 1 year as an exchange student back in 2008 and 2009. The main reason why I'm in China and in Shenzhen is because I'm Portuguese. So back in 2011, 12, I was in Portugal. It was still after like the 2008 economic crisis. We were still feeling it very heavily at the time. Unemployment was like just incredibly high. I mean, most people my age at that time simply did not have a job. Like everybody was living with their parents and stuff like that. And I was somewhat familiar with China. I had a friend here in Shenzhen that allowed me to live at her place at the time for the first couple of months when I came in. So I decided, to come here and try, like an immigrant, I suppose, with that kind of mindset. And yeah, I've been here ever since. Yeah, it worked out.
That's a very common story. I think we all like none of us really knew where Shenzhen was on the map, right? And then we kind of stumbled our way into Shenzhen. Um, yeah, and what was it attracted you about Shenzhen, like specifically? Like as you say, it's kind of a unique city, um,
Hmm.
probably globally.
Yeah, I visited Shenzhen before coming here. I mean, I visited in 2009, just when I was traveling through China with a friend. Went to Hong Kong, Macau, and some other cities. Um, and at the time already, Shenzhen looked incredible to me. I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of architecture, and I always grew up in a very small town, if you can even call it that, in Portugal. Although I was living in Lisbon before coming to Shenzhen, but still, my upbringing was mostly in small places. So to me, Shenzhen really looked fascinating, and it still does. It's one of those places that keeps changing. From that perspective, it never gets boring. It does in other ways, but not from that. So yeah, and of course there was a lot of companies here. I thought there would be a lot of at least more employment opportunities. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I didn't like Beijing, so I didn't want to go to Beijing. I thought it was like kind of a boring city. I wasn't
Yeah,
particularly interested in Shanghai as well. That I when I visited.
yeah.
So yeah,
That was
Shenzhen
my
just looked like a
question.
cool
Like
place.
most yeah, most expats make a beeline for Hong Kong, Singapore, or like Bangkok, right? Like that's the favorite kind of
Hmm.
places. Um, like I think it's kind of is it the adventurous side of you that kind of take you to Shenzhen? Like because most people would just come here, right, to Hong Kong and say, okay, that's enough for me.
Mhm. Hong Kong, I mean, from what I informed myself at the time, Hong Kong seemed harder just from the bureaucratic side of things, and of course economically. I also did try to seek for work in Macau at the beginning because I did have some connections in there, like personal connections, and being Portuguese and everything, I presumed at the time that that would make it easier, but not really. And obviously, there's not much employment in Macau unless, besides casinos and service industry and whatever, there's not much going on. So, Shenzhen is like super. It's kind of like in a very central area, like we know. We have access again to Hong Kong, and we're very near from from Korea, Japan, whatever, even from the East Coast in the U.S. So it always sounded exciting to me to be here and to come here, and it still does in a way. I'm still I'm not exhausted or anything, because I understand many people get burned out from living here, but I'm still I'm still tolerating it. Yeah.
Tolerating
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, you've been there 12 years. I lived in Shenzhen for 3. And I think most of
Mhm.
the people in the world don't really realize Shenzhen. So when people are talking to me about
Mhm.
Shenzhen, I simply define it as the most technologically advanced city on the planet. Feel free to disagree with me, Alex. I think it's totally fine, but I don't think I've been anywhere in the world that's more technologically advanced than Shenzhen. Everything's made there, it rolls out the factory there, and it goes straight into the city. All the industry, the vehicles such as trucks, lorries, whatever you want to call it, taxis, buses are all electric. Because of that, air's pretty clean. Most of the vehicles that most people drive are generally electric as well. It's got a fantastic transportation system, and it's by the sea. So I think that the quality of life in terms of the air is very good there, in contrast to places like Bangkok, which people might see as also like economically developing places. Again, I think Shenzhen is a tale of two cities as well. It does have its more rural parts, we shall say, with like factories. But in the inner city of Shenzhen, in the inner districts, which are Futian and Nanshan, the quality of life is arguably some of the best in the world, and again, the most technologically advanced place on the planet, in my opinion. Would you have any thoughts or agree or disagree on that?
Me?
Yeah, you are the
Oh,
guest.
sorry, because you mentioned Alex. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I would say that not only that, but Shenzhen is really a place. It really changes really fast. Like you mentioned, you've been here for 3 years. I don't know when that was, but I have this experience with people that I knew before and still know, that lived here like years ago when I first came here, and their idea, their view of Shenzhen really is very different from what Shenzhen really is right now. Even if we're just talking about 10 years difference, a lot has changed. Like before, people used to be kind of very snobby about just living in Futian or in some parts of Nanshan and whatever. But actually now, arguably, some of the best places in Shenzhen to live is another district, which is in Bao'an, in the new areas, which were all reclaimed from the sea and all that, which is it's hyper developed right now. Those places, it's even more than Futian in some ways. So it's this constant change and speed. It does make Shenzhen a very special place, and just the scale of it, it's just so huge. I mean, even maybe not in huge in square kilometers, I mean, compared to some other cities, but it's just the way the city is distributed. It's really unusual, and that makes it exciting, I think. And yeah, super super developed. I mean, I really feel, and this is no exaggeration, like in some ways, I'm people who live here are living like at least 2 decades ahead of most of the rest of the world. Even more than that, if you compare to some places are less developed. I mean, yeah, it's you can even be talking
I
about
agree.
a gap of like 50 years in some regards. Yeah, so it's really incredible. Yeah.
100% agree with you.
It's funny when people drop like a drone delivery video on Twitter X and it just blows up, right? Like people's minds are
Well,
just like Jake actually sent me that video, like a guy did that, and I think it was TikTok or IG Reel, and it just went mental. And
It
like,
was WeChat, I think.
yeah, people just can't get their heads around it. It's quite funny.
yeah, but that particular thing about the drones, I mean, I had arguments with people about that. I mean, that's still very far from being like standard. It's still in very
Yeah,
localized in some specific stations. Like people are still not ordering food like commonly. I mean, I never did. I hardly know anyone who did, but it's possible. Of course, it's a reality, but that's still, I feel like kind of experimental. But yeah, it's one of those examples. We have flying taxis now that go from here to Zhuhai. That's a reality. Like they have the price. You can literally book it. So that's crazy. Yeah.
have you
How do
done
you
that,
book it?
Daniel?
Hmm?
No, have you done that
How
Here?
yourself?
how do you book
Yeah.
it?
Oh.
Yeah,
No,
how
I
do you
have
book it?
not done that. But I checked. Well, friend checked for me online actually, and we are talking about just a few days ago. Uh, but yeah, I would like to try.
Take a
Yeah, I would
video
like to
for us.
try. If I
We,
do,
we
yeah,
need to
yeah,
get that. We'll
I'll make
share
a
it.
video for
We'll
everyone.
share it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, tech is huge there, and we worked in tech there. We have a lot of friends that work in tech there, but your kind of main kind of interest is more on the media side and gaming side, and you know, like historically, that's been more of a like a Beijing thing, like in Asia, like and Tokyo,
Mm.
especially like these cities, maybe Seoul. So how come, or how do you kind of you know think about that, like the fact that you're in the media like game industry in South China.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where it changed a lot very quickly. Like right now, the biggest gaming company, of course, in the world has like the HQ here in Shenzhen, which is Tencent, and we have NetEase, which is the fifth biggest in the world. It's in Guangzhou, and they have offices here in Shenzhen as well. We have office from Nvidia, which is closely related to games. From many companies from SNK, and obviously tons and tons of Chinese companies here in Shenzhen as well. But yeah, personally, just to be totally transparent, I only worked here in a small publisher, a mobile gaming publisher, but most of my working career in Shenzhen has been in other companies, in tech companies, e-commerce, and not necessarily related to gaming. The gaming stuff, I've been doing it since I was basically in high school, like on a side, just writing for blogs, doing my own content, and whenever I can to write some bigger articles for some more legit media outlets. But I unfortunately I have not been able to really find a steady and big enough, I guess, game related job here in Shenzhen as I would want to. And yeah, that's been one of my frustrations about living here, if I'm going to be honest. And it's getting harder and harder for foreigners in particular to find a job in gaming here in China. So I don't really have hopes for that to happen. So I try to keep that
Yeah.
side of my work kind of like on the side, outside of my full times and whatever. So yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the kind of gaming? There was a big crackdown, right? Like freeze on a lot of the gaming publishing in
Hmm.
China. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that because people might not understand what happened there.
Sure. I mean that happened. Well, I think technically there were three. Depends how far back we want to go. But yeah, consoles were pretty much. I'm not even sure if banned is the right word, but like in the 90s in China, which is why PC gaming kind of is still much bigger than console gaming in China, and obviously then from that it naturally evolved to mobile, to smartphones, which is the biggest pie of the market in China by far, by very very far. There was a crackdown. I'm gonna get the dates wrong now. You put me on the spot here. It's embarrassing. But like 2016 to 18 or something like that, or before, there was like a big freeze, and then there was one more recently, not officially a freeze, but there was like for 9 months or something like that after COVID or something, where also there were no licensed games published in China, or in better words, there were no licenses given to games to be published in China. That ended now, but still, the Chinese market is still extremely difficult for specifically for international games. It's I mean, this is a big topic. I don't know how deep you want to get into it.
Let's get
But
into it.
I mean, sure. So I mean, for a game to be launched in China officially, it needs a publishing license given by the authorities, by the censors, whoever you want to call them. So officially, we only have like 100 or something games officially licensed every 2 or 3 months or something like that. Sometimes shorter periods of time. Unofficially, and that's why I like China in that regard. Unofficially, you have access to every single game possible in China through e-commerce platforms, either digitally or physically. They're all those editions are available, and there is a market, but it's imported markets. All those, especially the
Is
physical
this
consoles and
IP
everything.
infringement as well? It's like IP, like, as in it hasn't got copyrighted and it's technically an illegal black market.
No. It's not. It's the actual games. So, for example, let's say if you have like an Xbox or a PS5 or a Switch or whatever, and you
Hmm.
want to buy a physical game, I mean, not digital, just like the actual disc or cartridge, you will find it very easily, like on Taobao and other e-commerce platforms. But those copies are all from either from Hong Kong or from Taiwan or from Japan more often, or they are from even from the US or from the European regions. And those are just simply imported and they're available here from day one because they are manufactured here for the most part. So it's very seamless. Like things are just available, but it's not like fake. It's not bootlegs. I'm not talking about anything like that. It's all very legit. It's just that those sales, because those games are technically imported, those sales are all accounted in other markets. So, for example, if a very popular game sells 2 million copies in Japan officially, that means that at least 2 to 300,000 of those copies were actually sold in China. So China is like inflating other gaming markets, and that's a very interesting thing. But that's for consoles, and consoles are still a very small niche in China. The PC scene is much bigger and much wider and more complex, I would say. And the mobile side of gaming in China, that's the more legit, I guess. It's harder to play things that are not officially available in China, just because most of the games on mobile are online. They're free to play. They require a registration with IDs and whatever. And if you want to spend money on the games, they need to be officially connected to the Chinese networks for payments and for online play. So that's
It's
much more.
actually it's
Uh,
a good point, Daniel. Like when you go to a restaurant in China, everyone's playing a game on
mhm.
their phone. I think people in the
Yeah.
West don't really understand how smartphone first like China is. Like it's crazy how much
Hmm.
you can do with a phone in China. Like everyone knows about payments, but like it's beyond that, isn't it? It's wild.
I
It's
mean, I
yeah.
remember in
It's. Mhm.
2016, e-commerce was 80% of e-commerce transactions happened on mobile. That was 2016. I mean, I can't imagine what it was in the UK. It was probably less than about 30% at that point in time.
Yeah,
Sorry, Daniel,
it's
you
very
were
hard to talk to
you were
people. It's very hard to talk to people outside of China about that because I think it's really hard for people to have that understanding, just the scale of things in China. Like people in most of the world are using either WhatsApp or still Facebook Messenger, or if they have iPhones, they're using the iMessage whatever service, and that's not really a thing in China. I mean, obviously people use iPhones and everything, but WeChat is just so integrated in everything, and there's nothing that compares to that. And there's good and bad things about it, obviously, and the bad things are probably the reason why it will never an app like that will never work in most well free market democratic countries in the world, I think. But it's still very impressive, and it's that allows for in some areas for very fast development, and it's incredible. Yeah.
and
What
WeChat
did
is
yeah,
owned by
go on.
Tencent, the number one
Yeah,
gaming publisher as well, right?
exactly. Yeah.
What's your take, Daniel? Like I know there's a lot of politics on Twitter like around this sort of topic. So I was in China when WhatsApp got banned. Like you
Hmm.
couldn't use WhatsApp anymore. It was literally working one day, and then it stopped working the next day. So like my mom was like, okay, I can't call you anymore. Like what are we gonna do? So I got her on WeChat. Um, what's your take on this? Like, do you think what's your take on like Western companies going into China, like trying to kind of do business, and then obviously Chinese companies like banning other apps? Most notably, obviously, we've got the TikTok situation right now. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, from the Chinese, just to be clear, we can still message on WhatsApp. We just cannot send files or make calls or anything like that without VPN. But just written message, they still work, which is kind of nice. But yeah, from the Chinese side of things about China banning apps and platforms and services that are international, I think that's totally not surprising. That's just very typical of any country, with this kind of political ruling. Of course, China has a very protectionist, and this is an euphemism, protectionist view on its companies. Fair competition is not a thing, is not assured for anyone in China, especially if the competition is not national. So I think that there's nothing shocking or surprising in that. And by saying this, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying literally there's nothing surprising about that. Anyone who would be surprised by China banning apps or whatever, just look at the government, just look how things work. That's just look at any other country in the world before that had similar one party states. So that's just there are names for that, of course. From the other perspective, from the US, like about if you're asking about that about TikTok on the US, I understand the temptation to be like, yeah, they should ban TikTok, but I'm against it simply because I think that in a democratic country, if you set up the precedent of banning an app, whatever it may be, unless it's like a Nazi app. If it's a Nazi app, then yeah, maybe. If it has like the swastika as the logo, maybe you can ban it. But any other app, if you create that precedent of banning it, then you open the precedent to ban other apps in the future that might be national or foreign or whatever, for whatever
Yeah.
intents may be from the ruling party at the
I've tried
moment
to
in the
argue this
future.
on
So
yeah, I tried to argue
yeah,
this on X, but I basically got a lot of like hate. Um,
it's
I think
subtle,
it's
and X doesn't work for
yeah,
subtle and nuanced.
no,
Yeah.
no, no. I think it's a very valid argument. But I don't. Maybe people wouldn't see the argument unless they've lived in like Asia or China per se. Like they need to kind of understand the local
And
context.
here's the thing. I did see. I mean, I'm talking about on my own personal Chinese social media here. I have a lot of friends who work at TikTok. Um, I used to work in Alibaba, full disclosure. So a lot of people from Alibaba went over to ByteDance, which is TikTok's parent company. And at the time of the banning, I mean, the second wave of banning, there was a flyer that was made by ByteDance. It was created by ByteDance, and it said, "Keep TikTok free in the USA for freedom of speech." And I thought that that was somewhat a little bit ironic.
Yeah, but that's again, but that's not. Is that surprising? I mean, that's awful, right? That's comical, almost. But that's like North Korea. The official name of North Korea is like the People's Democratic whatever Republic of Korea, isn't it, or something like that?
Yep.
So people will use and abuse rhetoric in any way they can. Now, obviously, it's hilarious that China would accuse others of lack of free speech. Of course, we all know that. But that does not mean, in my opinion, that a democratic country should, in fact, restrict free speech. That's the important thing. Like, just because the quote unquote bad one is doing that and is prevailing with that, it doesn't mean we, quote unquote, we should give up on our own values and on our very fundamental liberties. Because I know it's not popular nowadays to say, and full disclosure, I'm totally on the left. I always voted on left leaning parties, socialist parties, even back in Portugal.
To be
And
fair, though,
I
Hitler ran the National Socialists, and you
yeah,
earlier said that you would ban the Nazi app.
yeah, but Nazi, that's well, there's a spectrum, obviously. I would never support the Nazis because Nazis was a fascist. So you can't be like you can have a socialist country a party without it being a fascist party. I mean, Portugal was ruled by a socialist party literally up until a few months or two ago until the elections, and there's absolutely nothing dictatorial or oppressive about their philosophy and their agenda. And that is that we can see the same in parties in France and in Italy and in Spain and whatever. Now, the extreme right and extreme left parties, that's a different conversation. Those are, that's hardcore and that's extremists. But what I was going to say, and I think I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
I've thrown you off. I'm so sorry. It's just,
No, it's okay. It's okay.
freedom. It's always a good topic. I love this discussion. We've had it on here a few
Yeah.
times. That I don't like the constructs of left and right, because I think that they can divide society, and I think most people, regardless of their political stance, are generally quite moderate, and most people are generally in the middle. And those terminologies, left and right, I think are in some ways constructs that are manifested by certain aspects of the media that divide people for either eyeballs or political agendas. But we won't go down that rabbit hole today. So I'm sorry for throwing you off. It's just, should we keep the Nazi app on the
no.
Western?
But just, I'm sorry if you don't mind, just for me, I don't want to be misrepresented or anything like that. When I say I'm left leaning, just to be clear, I'm left leaning from a Western European perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So not from an American perspective, because the Americans, their politics, no offense to anyone, even the democratic country in most European countries would fall at the most in the center or right, not on the left. And I agree with that most people are actually have a lot in common and most people are moderate. And if there is a need sometimes, in my opinion, to vote left, is because the corporate interests, which are obviously on the right, are so strong anyway that things ultimately, ideally, they balance out towards the middle. And I think that's the ideal. But my main point was about the free speech and freedom of expression. I think that's super important. And I know nowadays that's kind of a buzzword for right-wing people. And I think that's completely nonsense because freedom of expression is the most basic thing you can have in democracy and whatever. So I'm if we lose that, I think that's really fundamental, and that's one of the points. Even if I don't like TikTok, I think sometimes we have to protect the bad just to assure the wider good.
Yeah,
And
even
if TikTok is bad, it's not the point. Is not really TikTok. The point is the precedent. The point is the action that the doors that it would open up, and that's the danger.
Yeah,
I think.
Just a quick one on TikTok, Daniel. So another kind of story that just came out recently was, and me and Jake experienced this as well. Like there was a kind of complaint, if you will, that ByteDance, the company, was being run by Chinese managers, even though it was an international company. And obviously that's a national security thing, but the main disgruntled was the fact that it was Chinese style management and the way that it was being run. So there was a lot of controversy on that side. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about Chinese companies running like global entities in a Chinese way, and vice versa? Like, what do you think about Western companies doing business in China? Is there a solution to this, or should we just accept it for what it is?
I think we can say a lot about that. Again, this is a very hot topic because people will just not accept what I think are some very pragmatic realities. So it's like when they say about TikTok, about the CEO of TikTok being from Singapore and all that. I mean, technically, yes, it is, but is that really of any consequence? Like TikTok is still from ByteDance. ByteDance is still in China. Like the CEO of TikTok doesn't really have decision-making power as much as I think some people believe he does.
Same.
Ultimately, if I'm going to be totally honest, I would say he has zero at the end of the day. But I know most people would not agree with that. But whatever, that's just what I think, and from what I observe in my life, I think it's totally. I think it's like role playing when we see him speaking, in front of Congress and whatever. That's like I'm watching a Monty Python skit, like it's like, okay, whatever. But I mean, I'm being kind of facetious, but also honest about it. And yeah, I mean, the pragmatic part is every single company that has an HQ in China, I mean, Chinese company, either you want it or not, it answers to the party, right? I mean, this is not to say, I think people have an idea that every company has like a CCP agent in their board watching what's happening. I don't think that happens everywhere. I mean, obviously, maybe if you are Tencent and these big companies, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, I know many people who are affiliated with a party. That's not a big deal. I mean, many people are for many different reasons, for many kinds of convenience. There's hundreds of thousands or more millions in China. That's not to say that they are, dogmatically followers of the cult or anything like that. It's just a thing. It's just again, for many reasons. But yeah, but any company that Chinese that's in China ultimately answers to the party. And if the government tomorrow decides that the company will have to do something or imposes some new regulation, there's just no way around it. That's just what it is, and that's just what happens, and that's it. Again, that's the nature of having a one state government, like which
Daniel,
in some cases
sorry.
it can be called a dictature, a dictatorship. In some cases, can be called the despotic government. There are many words for it, and not all are the same. It is nuanced. Not all are the same. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Daniel,
are
do you think? Oh,
mhm. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Daniel, do you think that talking objectively about this topic, about Chinese companies potentially being having a level of affiliation to the state, potentially in a lot of cases, and I'll speak from personal experience because I worked at two Chinese companies, having a state organization with its own private room inside the actual company, do you think that this create sensitivities to be able to talk about this topic objectively, such as if you talk about the topic, many ordinary folk, normal people in China feel it a sensitive topic to be able to say this, even though objectively you would argue it's the truth.
Well, obviously, I mean, a company doesn't need to have a room with someone representative of the government or anything. Like that's one of those things that's needless to say. Of course, people. I mean, uh, I don't like to generalize, and I don't like to talk for other people. I mean, Chinese people have their own
Mm-hmm.
agency and their own independence of thought. So I don't presume to know what people think, but from what I talk with people, most people are very well aware of the limitations, of the state they're living under, and also of its advantages, of practical advantages. Of course, they do exist. We have to be pragmatic on both sides. So people are very aware of that kind of, and they are sensitive to it. And of course, they will not talk about it, or they will talk in small groups or with people they trust. I mean, that's just the way it is, and people need to understand that. And I think more people than we give credit to understand this. I mean, we have. I don't. I'm sorry, I didn't ask. I don't know exactly where you guys are from. I think Jack is. I assume from the UK.
Same. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but like, yeah,
Different
but like
countries, though.
even
Yeah.
even in Europe, we have a lot of people alive today who lived under dictatorships. In Frank's state in Spain, lived in Italy. In my case, in Portugal, we had a fascist dictatorship up until 74. My parents lived that. They were adults when that was still going on. Again, in South America, we have many cases of that. In Brazil, in Argentina, anywhere you go in the world. So people know how these things work and how people behave in these situations because it's happening now in some parts of the world. And again, I'm not saying China is the same as those. I'm not comparing China to North Korea or to Cuba in the 70s or whatever. There's many different echelons of that. And in some regards, I do think China is an incredibly free country in some regards. And that's interesting to talk about. But my
Mm.
point is, of course, people will be sensitive about it when they're talking in companies, but I don't think there's no need. They don't need an agent to be there, like with a fancy tall hat, reminding them that they cannot talk about this or that. People simply, it's just in the nature now. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
been
is what
going
it
on
is, right?
for
It's fact.
decades. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So yeah,
yeah.
exactly,
You
and yeah,
touched on a point there,
that's it.
actually.
So,
You're actually one of our few guests from Europe. Most of our guests are from the US and Asia.
mm,
You're from Europe. You're from Portugal. Um, what's
yeah.
the future of Europe right now? Because we're seeing America slap 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, whereas Europe's kind of opening
Mm.
the doors to China. It's a very symbiotic relationship, right, with Germany especially. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Like the Europe China situation, the future of Europe business wise.
Yeah, well, I'm obviously I'm not an expert on of any kind in politics or export import regulations and markets and all that. I will say about the EVs, about the electric cars in particular. Personally, as a customer, as a future potential consumer going back to Europe someday, if I don't die before that, I look forward to Chinese cars, these very cool Chinese cars that exist now, to be available in Europe. On the other hand, I understand the tariffs in the US because obviously their car industry, that's one of their pillars of industry. I mean that's America in a way, just like it is in a way to Japan. I do feel like if these EVs do come to Europe specifically, they will it will be very hard for brands like, especially for like the Spanish and French brands like Peugeot, Citroën, Renault,
Mm,
Seat, Skoda, from where is Skoda from? Czechoslovakia, yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
it's owned
Poland,
by Aldi, though,
yeah,
right?
and yeah, and Dacia from Romania. I think these brands, it will be very hard for them to compete, especially the French ones. And I do think that's sad because I'm a fan of those brands. I think they have a lot of history and they make a lot of cool stuff. Just as a consumer, I'm concerned, but at the same time, that's the market. Like the consumer ultimately decides what happens. And
should Europe be more protectionist,
Mhm.
Daniel? Should like America? Should they go
I
down that road?
think I
Like
think
China.
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of a radical in that regards. I'm very much for the sovereignty of each country. I'm not anti-European Union, but I do think that the European Union, in a way, I'm totally for open borders and all that. But I do think the European Union sometimes has too much authority on what independent countries can and cannot do in their regulations, and how they apply regulations.
Hmm.
So I think that would have to be, ideally, it would be each country to decide what kind of tariffs they would put on Chinese cars and whatever. And I think that would be the democratic way. Of course, the problem is commerce. We have distributors in Europe that distribute across different markets, so that makes it all more complicated. And there's too many business interests
But
that want
yeah,
to
I mean,
unify
broadly
things. And
speaking,
yeah,
Daniel, like how should we deal with China then in terms of trade? Like, should we be more protectionist? Like, given the general glut of products, like it feels like there's more Chinese companies selling stuff than there is demand, like in a lot of different sectors right now.
yeah, yeah. I feel that too. Again, I think it's dangerous on both sides. If we say we want to be, I think it's case by case. We cannot generalize too much. Maybe we should be more protectionist in some things and maybe not in some other things. Again, it depends on what resources. I think
Mm.
Europe in general needs to be smart about it. What resources do we have in Europe? What can we produce? Can we more easily import? And then, go case by case, not just because it's from China specifically. Now, I don't believe, I like, it's a security threat to have electric cars in the roads in Europe or in America or whatever. Like, yeah, sure, of course there's
What about
privacy issues, but even if they are.
Daniel? What about security cameras,
Mhm.
stuff like that? That's really, there's Chinese companies that make security cameras. Like that's a very
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of edge case. But what about that kind of thing?
I mean, again, I'm no tech expert, even though I worked with tech, but
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, of course, I mean, I expect
Or
maybe
the
the
H word,
company
Huawei.
back. Yeah, I mean, again, but the Huawei thing is kind of the same, like TikTok in America. Sure, of course, I assume that the Chinese HQs can access the information. I assume that, and I think that should not come as a surprise. That's the thing, is people are like processing as it. like they're shocked by it, and I don't think it's shocking. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's not surprising. And I think we're still in that phase where people are still kind of waking up to that reality, which I think we should have been awakened by that a long time ago, since 9/11 and whatever, like with all the laws in America against privacy of people, and also in Europe. Then with the attacks in Madrid in 2000, when was that, 2009 or 11? I don't even know. So a lot of things change in that regards in terms of privacy and all that. So I always assume that the data and information is never my own, my private one. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. But if we're gonna select like one specific brand not to trade with because of that, then we're just opening this route of selective paranoia. And I think paranoia should be all encompassing. We should be aware of all the threats, not just like Huawei or TikTok or whatever. Like I don't trust Vodafone in Europe as much as I trust Huawei in keeping the privacy of my data. I just don't. Either either by design or either by potential incompetency from them. There's always things that might happen. That's so it's not ideal, but yeah. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you get an electric car from China in Europe, I don't know, just call your friend who's a hacker and run the car, make a scan, install some mods on the car, just change it up so it's more to your tune. I don't know, like, that's, don't have naked sex in the car so they won't see you back in China. I don't know, like, yeah,
I have to
it's not
say,
ideal,
skipping
but
back for a moment, the technology in EV in China is second to none. I'd go so far to say as there's a lot of Chinese EV companies and manufacturers operating in the domestic market of China that are unheard of outside of the domestic market of China, that can produce a better standard, at least in the mid to premium tier of EV car, than even Tesla. I've been in the back of quite a few Chinese EV, and I would definitely say they're better than a Tesla. Brands that you've never heard of. Is there a few brands that you could maybe talk about, Daniel, or just shout out now that are operating? Because you'll get a DD, right? You'll get
yeah.
the Chinese version of Uber, and there's probably a few brands that you are aware of that haven't even hit markets outside of China.
Sure.
Are superb.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I think for people working in the industry, and again, I like to always say this: I'm not an expert on the field, so don't abuse me if I say something too naive or too stupid. But I think for people working in the industry that I see comments on Twitter and other platforms, I think it's pretty well established that some of these brands in China are far superior than Tesla nowadays. And it's important to mention that nowadays, because if you go back 2 or 3 years ago, maybe the conversation would be different. But that's just the speed that things are changing, and that's very important. But yeah, like just brands like Xiaopeng. Now I think it's more known like Zeekr. I still don't know how to pronounce it, Zeekr or Zeekr. What's the other one? I mean, there's so many. Like I go outside, honestly, nowadays I go outside, I see logos
BYD.
in cars that I've well, yeah, BYD. That's the
Pretty
most
well
popular
known,
one.
Yep.
Yeah, but I see logos that I never seen before. Almost every day. I'm not exaggerating. I mean,
Right.
there's this other brand that has a logo that looks like Acura, but it's like upside down. I don't know. There's just like so many. Like and they look so cool. Like they look incredibly cool. Like some of the cars here now, they look so futuristic. They look like concept cars that just came out of the Geneva Motor Show. Like, and
Okay.
they're just on the road and they're just on the market.
Here's a grenade. Here's a grenade, Daniel, right?
Mm.
Do you think this success is due to the fact that Chinese work harder than Europeans? Like, if we're talking about cars, like, is this because they work harder?
I wouldn't presume that. I don't have experience in factories or anything like that. I just simply China has more resources. It's a numbers game. They can just
Here's my opinion
yeah.
on that. I'm sorry, I've got to jump in here because I once had a slight disagreement with somebody in a Hong Kong visa office whilst I was queuing for my visa to go to China. I think, Alex, you know the story. But we were queuing in a long queue to go collect our visa, and it took ages. We were in there for like 3 hours. And the lady who lived in Guangzhou, who was not Chinese, turned to me and said, "I can't believe how long this queue is and how long it's taken. The Chinese are known for their efficiency. And I said, wrong. They're not known for their efficiency. They're known for their productivity. And I think it depends on how you define hard work, to answer the question, because German people, highly productive, everybody knows it, globally famous for being productive. Between 9 and 5, you're probably not going to get a group of people that can produce more. However, the Chinese people that I've worked with in companies like Alibaba and Oppo work incredibly long hours, and they'll grind it out throughout the day, and at the end of the day produce more than the average German worker from 9 to 5. And henceforth, I would say that China has a higher productivity than most European countries, not necessarily a higher efficiency. And they may be two definitions of working hard, maybe working smart, but that's at least how I would see it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would add to that generally speaking, Chinese people are kind of chill. I mean, I see, again, I always worked in Chinese companies here in my 12 years and with Chinese colleagues. And yes, people grind a lot. They will OT, they will work overtime for who knows how many hours. They will be
Every
doing
day.
weekly reports, whatever. But most of them also, when we talk to them and stuff, they just want to chill. They also, many of them just want to be lazy as much as they can when they can, just like anyone else in the world. I'm not saying this is a Chinese only thing. I just think this is a human thing. That's just how people are. And here is not different. The difference here is you, while in Germany, from your example, you can have, or in if you want to use the lazy stereotype from Southern Europe, you can have like three lazy people working in Italy or in Spain or in Portugal or in Greece, and in China they can have 10. So the 10 lazy will do a lot more than the three lazy. And there's just, it's again,
Yeah.
it's a numbers game. There's just so much more, and the competitivity between people. If one person just it slacks too much or lets go too much, they're out, and there's like another 10 waiting at the door. So there's never that issue of it never stops. The gears never stop, and that I think is, again, and just because there's so many people, there's more. It's more likely that you're gonna have like geniuses, just for the research and development side of things. You're gonna have more technical people that are really, really smart. Of course, America still dominates this in terms of patents and all that stuff, just because of the legacy they have, and just because of the quality of the education and all that. But when you add up the numbers, like you're naturally gonna have more. I mean, yeah, I'm not using that word casually, but more geniuses per thousand people.
There
That's
is.
just a thing.
I also find it interesting that in China there is two, I guess, colliding schools of thought, which are Zhou Liu, which means 996, working from 9 to 9 every day, 6 days a week, and Tangping, which roughly translates to lying flat, meaning don't try very hard. And yet these two constructs of way of thinking about how to approach work coexist simultaneously, and sometimes even within the same people. I think that's quite an interesting
Yeah,
thing about China. It's known for both.
yeah. If you don't mind me saying, just again, just from my personal experience, I think that the 9 to 6, of course, that was very controversial here a few years ago. It was a hot topic, trending online, all that stuff. It changed, I think, legally. The government did include regulations to kind of stop that, and I do think that doesn't happen as much. It does happen. It does happen very much, but I think there is a lot of more of sorry. There's a lot more of I don't want to say entitlement because that sounds bad, but like responsible entitlement where people are aware they're not supposed to be working so many hours and they will actually stand up to that. Like I see that personally. Like in the last few companies I worked for, actually I've been very surprised of seeing people just get up of their desks, at 6 at the time to leave work and just leave, and nobody batting an eye at that, and that's it. And of course there's always those who will stay many hours later, either because they're really ambitious in terms of like their sales goals or whatever, or either because they have problems at home and they just don't want to see their wives and their kids or their husbands and they want to stay at work till late. But I think the attitude specifically about the 9/6, it kind of changed, and I think that's important. Again, it's the speed, how quick things change in China. That was really a very, very big thing like 3, 4, 5 years ago. But I think things changed considerably since then. And it's kind of hard to explain it to people who are not here. But it did, just the mindset. I see that in people in daily, especially in younger people.
Mm.
Younger staff, like they don't care. Like the recently that came out of university, they don't there's yeah, you mentioned the thing about lying flat. There's the other thing, which is fishing. I don't know, I forgot now the name in Chinese, but it's basically wasting as much time as you can in a company while you're at work. They call it fishing, kind of, as in fish, being a fish. And younger people, like generally, they don't care. Like they will just like they will take breaks. They will go to the washroom for 30 minutes to watch their videos, and like they're like
No,
super
that's
super
only
like
half the time we used to go. To be fair, we used to sit there for an hour.
well.
Just to kind of
But yeah.
wrap this one, Daniel. So basically, what you're saying is it's probably
Mhm.
going to all equal out in the end. Like eventually, Chinese productivity will kind of come in line with Europe. You think that's kind of and the US. Just Jake always asks this
Yeah.
question at the end of the pod. Jake, go ahead.
Future predictions time, Daniel. So it can be future predictions for China, can be future predictions for the world, yourself. What are your future predictions?
Oh, that's I hate that question because I know as soon as we end this, I will have a lot of thoughts, but no, I don't have any.
Tweet it.
Yeah, I'll have to. I don't know. I think the Chinese market will is definitely maturing, and it's maturing a lot. I think we haven't seen the next big breakthrough. If there's any prediction we can do about the future, that's always right. Is that we don't know what will be the next big thing and what will actually change the world next. And they tried in recent months and actually recent years. There's been a lot of trends, about Web3 related to crypto, metaverses, and whatever, and those have all fallen into kind of this limbo of abstract nothing in the end. I mean, not crypto. Crypto is real and blockchain is real, but the whole metaverse Web3 thing and whatever. And if you'd ask 4 years ago, people here, what is the future? A lot of them, these entrepreneur-minded people, would say that's the future. That's yeah, we are, and it turned out at least it's not right now. So I'm always my idea is always that the next big thing, the next big breakthrough, it's something that nobody has thought of, and it will just it's like hey, AI. Like if you have talked about AI 10 years ago, to me I would have said AI, that's in games, like when you're enemies, like when you're playing FIFA or whatever. Yeah, the other team is playing with AI, but nobody would have imagined
Yeah.
what happened now with ChatGPT and the AI bots. Everybody's doing their work now with AI bots. It's crazy. I mean, so that's
We'll,
something that
we'll
came out of out of
yeah.
nowhere and just
We'll check in.
changed everything.
We'll check in with you in a year's time, Daniel. Assuming you're still in China, and you can give us an update.
Maybe. Okay.
All right, guys.
Have a job in the EU after this one.
That was good. Let's do that. A year's time. And yeah, if you're ever in Hong Kong, Bangkok, we can catch up, or China, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Will do.
Cool. Right, guys. This is a wrap. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.